All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of El Nino Speaks. I'm your host, Jose Nino, and this evening I'm joined by Sam Parker. How are you tonight, Sam?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Jose. Appreciate it. It's good to finally see your face. I see you interacting on my tweets a lot.
Yes, I'm like basically a Sam Parker reply guy, but and it's
Well, I appreciate all my reply guys. You're one of my top reply guys, probably top 3 or 5. So,
yeah,
like I said, it's good. It's good to meet you. You have a lot of high IQ takes, a lot of high IQ commentary. So I appreciate the contribution and teamwork you bring to my timeline.
Thank you so much. And yes, I find your threads to be like some of the best in terms of just like the history of like Jewish influence across the US. And you're good specifically at defining like the ultimate question of politics to whom, and of like who is like the actual sovereign of like US politics. And what I like about it too is that you take a very more like analytical, detached view when you look at like the actors and how Jewish influence evolves over time and the type of strategies they use. Now, I before we start diving into that, could you let your the audience know like just more about your background and what got you into politics and eventually start studying Jewish influence in the American political system?
But that's a long that's a long story. I'll try to be brief. So I'm from Utah, and in Utah we have something unique that no other state in the union has. We have something called a caucus convention system. Now, people might have heard of the Iowa caucus or statewide, party conventions or whatever, but Utah's is truly unique. What happens is on one night of the year, Utah's divided up into these little precincts, like 2,000 different precincts, like on the Republican side, okay? 2,000 precincts across the state. And it's basically like an extended neighborhood. And on one night out of the year, everybody from that neighborhood, from that precinct, goes and meets in a designated area in their caucus as a precinct, okay? And you discuss the issues, you discuss political candidates for various offices, and then the precinct, using the rules of parliamentary procedure, nominates people to be delegates, okay? Caucus delegates. These caucus delegates will go to the state party convention in a couple of months after this caucus night, okay? Where they will listen to candidates give speeches and cast their vote for political candidates who will then go on to the primary ballot, okay? And then, of course, primary ballot, then to the general ballot, right? So the caucus convention system is a selection process to get candidates onto the primary ballot. Okay, that's how it works. Now, what happens is these delegates from the neighborhood precincts, these caucus delegates, will then contact the political candidates in the various races and interview them, ask them questions. They will vet the political candidates on behalf of their neighborhood precinct party members, right? Now, because the candidates want to get onto the primary ballot, they're incentivized to reach out to these delegates. So this system fosters a two-way communication where the delegates want to get contact with the candidates and the candidates want to get contact with the delegates to win them over. So it's this really intimate, extensive vetting process. Mm-hmm. These delegates actually get access. So when I became a delegate in Utah. I got access to the guys running for governor, to the guys running for Senate, to the House of Representatives, like talking with them on the phone, emailing with them, meeting with them in college meetings, going to events to ask them live Q&As, and so on and so forth. And this is something that the general populace in most other states is not able to do. If you're in California or New York or Texas or wherever, good luck talking to a candidate for Senate or a candidate for governor or whatever. Good luck being able to ask them any questions you want and actually getting answers, okay? That's just simply not possible in most of the states in the union. But in Utah, you can do this.
Yeah, it's unique.
Yeah, you can get access to the candidates, and they have to give you access because they need your votes to get onto the primary ballot. And so this is really a fantastic system, and it helps weed out, the pretenders. And it also introduces accountability. For instance, in 2010, we had a 3-term U.S. Senator, Bob Bennett, who was voted out of office. How often you see 3-term U.S. senators get voted out of office? And the reason is because he had voted for TARP and the big bailouts after the housing crash of 2008. And so the Utah caucus system, the Republican wing of the Utah caucus system said, hey, this guy doesn't represent conservative Republican values. He voted for the big government bailouts. We don't want him. And you know what? He went to the convention and he lost. He lost at the convention. He didn't make it onto the primary ballot because these caucus delegates, these people are highly motivated. They're very politically savvy, knowledgeable. They know the history of what's going on. They're keeping track of people. They're introducing accountability into the process, you see. And so they voted him out, and that they put Mike Lee on the ballot instead. Now we got U.S. Senator Mike Lee, who's been, by and large, a stalwart conservative Republican, at least at first. He's got problems now. I think, he supports Israel. He supports, big tech in Silicon Valley and H-1B visa expansion. So I think he's been.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. But for at least his first term or two, he was very conservative. Let's limit government. He was conservative on Supreme Court justices and these types of things. I think he's been institutionalized now. But the point is he was an upstart, and we got rid of a 3-term U.S. senator who just didn't reflect conservative Republican Utah values. They were able to get rid of him. Now, you're not normally able to do that in most states. And we were able to do it because of this unique caucus convention system where these caucus delegates are able to get access to the candidates, to vet them, and to introduce accountability into the process. You voted for that bailout. You voted for the big government. You're out of here. Now, the general populace of Utah probably still would have voted for him. So this pre-screening with the caucus delegates allowed us to remove him. This is the advantage of the caucus convention system. Now, the other advantage is if you want to run for something and get access to the primary ballot, you don't need a lot of money. Now, in most states, you have to spend lots and lots of money to get signatures, to get media.
Oh, it's insane. Yeah.
Right? So Jason Chaffetz, a former U.S. congressman, he works for Fox News now, he got onto the ballot. I think he spent something like $5,000 when he originally got elected. He only spent like $5,000. He knocked all the doors. He had a bunch of cottage meetings. He went to all the party organized meetings, and for a relatively small sum of money, he was able to get onto the primary ballot. And then that gave him access to more donors and more media, of course. And then he was able to win. Right. So, So this is the advantage of the caucus convention system in Utah. No other state has this. It's very difficult. It's kind of a little esoteric, very detailed to explain why it's different and why it's powerful. But those are the main features. It introduces accountability. It introduces access, and a high quality vetting process. And it allows regular people to run for larger offices without a huge bankroll behind them. So I wish more states had this, to be honest. But anyway, that's a big detour because I started out as a state delegate, as one of these caucus delegates in Utah. Later, I used that same process to run for the U.S. Senate against Mitt Romney. Okay, so that's how when Orrin Hatch, who had been I think at the time, 6 or 7 term U.S. senator, he'd been senator since like the 1970s.
Yeah.
Fully institutionalized, uniparty guy. And he announced his retirement, and he basically anointed Mitt Romney to be his successor. He's like, hey, Mitt, why don't you move to Utah and let's just basically pass the thing over to you. And I saw this, and I was not a big Mitt Romney fan. He's a big government leftist, basically, not a conservative guy. We all saw how he tanked the election, when he was running against Obama. Not a particularly good conservative, has stabbed the conservative movement in the back many, many times. We saw him wearing the mask and marching with BLM and doing all this sort of nonsense. And I saw that early. I'm like, I'm not a Mitt Romney fan. And I tried to get other people to run against Mitt Romney in 2018. One notable person had run for governor in Utah. And there was just no action. Nobody was getting in. Everybody was just like acquiescing to Mitt Romney. I guess he's going to be the guy. Like, nobody can beat Mitt Romney. And I'm like, well, I just can't have that. And when nobody else would step up and step in, then I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm jumping in. And I jumped in and I affected the race. I know I affected the race. And We held him a little bit accountable because he did not win the state convention that year. He came in second. The delegates actually chose somebody else over Mitt Romney. Now, unfortunately, the way it works in Utah is that the top two delegates will go to the primary ballot. So even though he got second place, he still made it to the primary ballot. And I'm leaving a lot of other details out. But the point is, we made him have to be, respond to our demands and become more accountable. We put him on notice, like, you're not just going to cakewalk through here, Mitt. And, we saw this now in 2024. He did not run for re-election, right? So, there's still a semblance of accountability there. And anyway, the point is when I ran against him, I was able to confront him and demand some concessions out of him that he acquiesced to. So even though I didn't win, I did affect the race, and I'm very proud of that. So that's how I got involved in politics in Utah, and how I ended up running for the U.S. Senate, and how that sort of all played out.
For that race, were you talking about Jewish influence or like Israeli influence at all, or was that afterwards?
That came after. I kept that pretty quiet. Utah's very conservative, very pro-Israel, very Zionist in that way. And it was also early on in my own noticing and awakening, and I was still sort of grappling with making sense of it all. So I didn't even have the grasp of it like I do now. Frankly, I didn't have the grasp 2 years ago or a year ago that I have now. I'm constantly learning, constantly progressing, and a year from now, I'll be that much more advanced than I am even now. It's a process. Anyway, the upshot of that is, I was sort of in the beginning stages of my awakening and noticing, and very politically unpalatable then. So, I quote unquote hid my power levels, whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
whatever they are. Somebody might clip this and say, "Oh, Sam Parker was being deceptive." No, not really. I didn't tell any lies, and I included what I thought was relevant and what I felt comfortable speaking to. I didn't feel comfortable speaking to the awakening and the noticing at the time for many reasons, not the least of which I didn't really know as much as I do now. I wasn't good at explaining it, and it's just more important, I think, and it wasn't relevant to a lot of Utahns at the time. So, if I were to do it now, obviously my campaign, if I run again, my campaign will look a lot different than it did then. My messaging will be a lot different than it was then. But it was appropriate. It was appropriate at the time for my level of understanding, and for, and for the needs of my campaign.
What would you say was like the kind of like main event or series of events or circumstances that got you really noticing and start to research the Jewish question like in depth and make it like a part of like your political program?
Well, so at the same time, this is there's overlap and there's a process. The whole awakening and noticing things is a process, right? Well, it was already happening when I was running. I was in the early stages when I was running. But it was a confluence of factors. I remember in the mid-20 teens, I got on Reddit for the first time. I was a slow adopter of Reddit, to be honest. Sometimes I'm a slow adopter of certain things. I was kind of late to get on Facebook. I didn't get on Facebook till late 2007 or early 2008, which makes it sound like I got in early, but I actually resisted for many months. In my MBA program at Arizona State at the time, a lot of my classmates were on Facebook and they're telling me to get on. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do any of that nonsense. So I resisted for several months. Then I finally got on. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. And, Facebook before all the censorship was actually kind of interesting,
Yes.
But anyway, but I was slow to adopt Reddit. So I remember in the mid-20 teens, I got on Reddit. I made a post, something about college football. I can't even remember exactly what the post was about. I made a sports ball post on called the college football subreddit, and it got censored. The mods removed it and censored me. They didn't explain why. They just didn't like it. I'm like, well, this is stupid. I made some innocuous post on the college football subreddit, and I'm like, I got censored. Very first post ever on Reddit. So I Googled, Reddit free speech Reddit alternatives, and there was a bunch, and one of them was called Vote, VOAT.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Vote was the Wild West, brother. No censorship. You didn't need to give them your phone number or any identifying information, right? And it was better than Reddit. It was a vigorous community, and they had this front page that aggregated all the top posts, and so I had a lot of the top news of the day. But sprinkled into the top news were these like Jewish posts, like, Jew posting and, Jew pills. And at first I was like, oh, well, yeah, uncensored platform, completely uncensored. The only thing not allowed on there was like child pornography. And I think maybe even porn in general. And other than that, like you can literally say anything and like no censorship, magical, right? And so I'm like, well, this is free speech. You wanted free speech, you're going to get like anti-Semites and Nazis and whatever, right?
Yeah.
Well, after a while, when you're poking through the news of the day and there's these Jew posts every so often, after a while, you click on one, because you're seeing them every day. You click on one. Well, this looks interesting. What's going on here? You click on it, you read it, and you read some of the comments. You're like, yeah, I don't know. Well, after a few months of that, you start saying, yeah, like what's going on here? Yeah, this is something strange. And then after 6 months of that, you're like, now you're a noticer, and so probably after a year on Vote, I was basically the man today. 6 months to a year, I'm basically who you know now. And and I remember having conversations with friends. I'm like, hey, have you ever noticed this? Have you ever noticed that? I had one friend in particular, I distinctly remember calling him up on the phone. I'm like, what do you make of this? What do you make of that? And he's like, yeah, that's interesting. And so, as a beginning noticer, you're like, well, is it all Jews? Is it just some Jews? Does it have anything to do with Judaism or something else? Is it these Frankists I keep hearing about? Is it Zionists,
Yeah, Khazars.
Khazars, what is it? You go through all these stages, all this information, and you don't understand that there's bot operations. You don't understand that there's bad operators peddling false influence and fake intel and false narratives trying to derail you, and kind of lead you off the scent. So, it takes time to sort of pick through that. But the point is I changed my information diet, right? It had been conservative talk radio, Fox News, all the standard, I used to read National Review and Weekly Standard. Going back 20, 25 years, I'd read Weekly Standard, National Review, Drudge Report, Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, the standard conservative right-wing sphere. And I remember canceling my cable in 2010. So I dropped all that, and then Drudge Report really exposed itself in 2016, when Donald Trump was running. It really turned on Trump. It turned on Ted Cruz even. And then I looked, and it got sold. I think Matt Drudge sold to some.
Yeah, that's what I suspected as well.
Yeah. And the content changed and the blend of content changed. And I went from like checking Drudge. You remember back in the day, you'd check Drudge 10, 15, 20 times a day to find out what the latest.
Yeah, I was addicted to that.
Yeah. And I went from checking Drudge 10 or 15 times a day to like once a day, then a couple times a week, then to just once a week, then to like once a month, then to like.
Is it still around?
I haven't looked at Drudge in months. Like I think
I haven't done it in years.
I probably checked it twice in the last 2 years, just to like, hey, what's happening over on Drudge? But I used to be on there every day, and they had all those links to all these different, journals and columnists, and many of them are Zionists and Israeli captured media: Breitbart, National Review, Weekly Standard, Mark Levin, just like all these people, right? All linked. And of course, Matt Drudge is a Zionist Jew, so this makes sense. Part of the containment apparatus, part of the Zio-conservative information plantation. So as I gradually cut that out, as I cut out Fox News, cut out Drudge Report, and then started reading Vote and information curated through free speech and noticers and J-pillars, now I've changed my information diet. I've not only changed my information diet, like, in terms of like what I'm eating, but I've now also changed the slant that I'm viewing it through, right? Because J-pillars are presenting the same news to you, offered through a different filter, offered to you through a different slant, right? And so I changed my diet and I changed the point of view that I'm consuming that diet, right? And so that had a profound effect on me. And I went from being just like a dopey, silly, average normie-con, right? With all the conservative talking points and Israel supporter and viewing the world, to a noticer, to a J-pillar, to much more of a nationalist, and being awakened to like what's going on. And of course that was a process, but I made room for it. And once I had room for it and changed that information diet, it allowed for the possibility for my thoughts and ideas and opinions to change as well. And it's just like, if you're fat and out of shape And how are you going to change that? Well, you have to change what you're eating, and you can't like fix it in one meal. Or if you're out of shape, like one workout's not going to make you in shape, right? So you have to like change your diet and eat a steady diet of different food for many days, many weeks, many months. You have to work out for many days, many weeks, many months, right? And this will gradually change your level of fitness and health, right? It's the same thing with your mind and your opinions and your political conceptions and your reality. There isn't one article you can read, one movie you can watch, one post you can make that's going to completely change your opinions and your filters and your outlook. But having a steady diet of that will change you. I got on Gab, I think, in 2017. So I was on Vote from like 2015 or 2016. Then I got on Gab in 2017, 2018. And Gab was very similar to Vote. Andrew Torba put together this wonderful platform that it's completely free speech, just no porn. And, so now you're speaking with people who are noticers and J-pillars and awakened, right? And so now that allowed me to evolve. And so I started posting on my Twitter probably in 2018 or 2019. I started posting J-pills because I don't like keeping my mouth shut. Also race realism, things like that. Once you get into that bucket, once you get into the nationalism, anti-Semitism buckets, we're all thrown together. And anti-Semites are becoming nationalists, and nationalists are becoming anti-Semites, and conservatives are becoming nationalists, and libertarians are becoming anti-Semites. It's just like this big homogenization, radicalization bucket that we're all being dumped in, and it's homogenizing us and radicalizing us, and everybody was emerging anti-Semite nationalists, right? And the same thing happened when Elon Musk bought Twitter and made speech much more free, and we've seen the explosion since ban the ADL. And October 7th, there's been explosion of Jewish truth and the truth about Jews and Jewish power and Jewish supremacy and its systems and nationalism and race realism. These things aren't being censored as heavily, and it allowed for a more free speech environment. There's more radicalization, there's more homogenization, and that kind of brings us to the topic that you want to talk about is if you're Jews and if you're part of the system of Jewish supremacy. And you've been trying to keep this out of the public eye and keep people on your, Israel first, Israel supporting conservative plantation. What do? How do you manage this awakening process? How do you preserve the interests of Israel and worldwide Jewry in the face of this mass awakening, right? How do you do that? Well, then you have to engage in psyops, narrative management, and other things that will basically neuter or neutralize this awakening, or rendering it inert, ineffectual, or putting into dead-end buckets. All sorts of machinations, anyway, that will still preserve the system of Jewish supremacy and Israel's position in the world, even though people are waking up to the realities behind it.
And this is described as the kosher sandwich, correct?
This is what I would call the kosher sandwich is part of it. And it's some people don't like that term. I just use it tongue in cheek. Basically, it's a dialectic. The technical term is a dialectic where you'll have two competing viewpoints, and you're presented two competing viewpoints. And the idea is, well, these are the only two possibilities that there are, and you got to choose one. The trick is that neither viewpoint gives you the full truth. So it doesn't matter which one you pick, you'll pick one that doesn't present the full truth. And so that's why, I call it the kosher sandwich, because it's two sides coming together, trapping you inside a matrix that doesn't present the full truth to you. It's a sandwich. It's like a pincer movement in the military where you're surrounded. Like some of the enemy forces will come up behind you and some will come in front of you and they will trap you, right? That's an encircling maneuver or a pincer movement. You're getting sandwiched, right? And so that's what I call these psyops that they're running. It's a dialectic. It's a pincer movement. It's a kosher sandwich.
More by any other means. Yeah.
Right. It's kosher sandwich. Kosher just meaning Jewish. It's a Jewish dialectic. It's a Jewish controlled dialectic that's designed to protect the system of Jewish supremacy and designed to keep you from finding the full truth, or organizing to defeat it, or from being able to identify where the real locus of power is so that you could attack it, dismantle it. If you can't identify the right locus of power, then you're going to be attacking the wrong thing, and now, it's sort of like in a car. If you're in a car, you got a steering wheel, wheels, engine, and it's like, let's say there's a sunroof and maybe some side mirrors and seatbelts or something. You could attack the sunroof or the side mirrors or the seatbelts or whatever, and that's not really going to affect the car. The car is still going to go just fine, but maybe you think you're making a dent because, wow, you wiped out that sunroof and you wiped out these side mirrors and you shredded those seatbelts, bro. You're doing damage to this car. But are you? So that's sort of the same thing with this Jewish dialectic, and we're going to get into that, explain how this operates. But there's a Zionist, anti-Zionist dialectic, a kosher sandwich between Zionist Jews and anti-Zionist Jews that's designed to keep you from identifying the real locus of power. So you're attacking the wrong things. You're attacking straw men, and you're attacking each other, non-Jews. And what this does is it allows organized Jewish supremacy, the system of organized Jewish supremacy, to continue operating when you think you've been doing damage to the system, but you really haven't even been touching it. Okay?
Yes, I want to go back to some of your points here because your background is kind of similar to mine because I came also from a very conventional background. I had more of like a libertarian origin story, but I was a Republican entryist through and through. But then I veered off into the conspiracy realm. And with the information I have now that about like the Jewish question, it's kind of interesting looking back because I fell into a lot of these traps as well. And one thing, your point about the diet and metaphor is actually really spot on because if you consume trash political content, your brain is going to be mush. You're just going to be politically like a mongoloid, like to be blunt. You're just not going to be operating at a really high level. You're at best a dupe and a useful idiot for Jewish supremacist causes in some shape or form. And I noticed this because when I got into more of the conspiracy movement, it was ideologically all over the place. You would see people that were more leftist, and these type of people, especially in the 9/11 truth movement, they'd be the first to say like, "Oh, this was like a false flag that was orchestrated by like the white people in the Bush administration, like George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld. Those would be like the people that would attack that." You'd see that, and that narrative was very pervasive. I knew people on the right that kind of bought into that. And then even in those broader movements, you would see like the LaRouchian people, like the acolytes of Lyndon LaRouche, they're always blamed like the British, like Anglo-American powers. And some of these critiques, there was a nugget of truth to them. The problem is looking at the whom that made up the ruling structures of these countries and the actual sovereigns, aka like the Jewish people and Jewish organizations and other institutions, because when they keep harping on like the people like the fall goys, the Shabbos goys that do all the dirty work for Jewish groups, you're just missing the mark there. And over time, I've noticed this dynamic too in my ideological evolution as I became like much more of a nationalist now, and I'm more of like a kind of like non-denominational nationalist at this point that's very much aware of like the Jewish question. Is that a lot of people don't really get this, that Jewish strategies for dominion, they're very diverse. They can shapeshift into like any type of ideology depending on the circumstances and the context as well. And treating it as something exclusively as a domain of like the left or the right is a way that you're just going to get hoodwinked. And I've seen this stuff also move into like even alternative media spaces as well. It's not just like the talk radio that I would listen to as well, like you did, but also that would try to like obfuscate and deflect attention from like the real culprits. And with respect to this dialectic that you mentioned, could you like give the audience an idea, like some concrete examples of how this like plays out in real time? Because
let me start with something that has to do with JFK. All right.
Yeah.
And it sort of touches on what you talked about with the Lyndon LaRouche, and after that, the 9/11 truther movement, where it was like, Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney was behind 9/11, right? Let's talk about JFK. JFK gets assassinated, and they pin it on Lee Harvey Oswald, right? And then they have a Warren Commission that says there's no conspiracy here, and it was a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, case closed. All right. shortly after that, a guy named Mark Lane, whose real name was Mark Levine, he was actually Jewish, okay, writes a book where he attacks the findings of the Warren Commission and says, no, I don't think the Warren Commission's right at all. I think there is evidence of a conspiracy, okay? And then throughout the rest of the 60s and 1970s and 80s and even into the 1990s, you had several Jewish authors and Jewish commentators and Jewish television personalities and other media personalities who presented this false dialectic, this two-sided thing where it's either Lee Harvey Oswald or a government conspiracy that was probably led by the CIA. And so they offered you two choices. Are you a Lee Harvey Oswald lone gunman theorist, or are you the CIA did it? And they even throw in the mob. They had a third. They even triangulated with the mob. Or if you don't think it's the CIA, or then they had like the mob. You know, the point is that it was
for the Fed.
Jewish researchers who constructed the narrative and the main counter narrative. Right. And this is capped off, of course, in 1991 by the movie JFK that was written by the Jew, Zachary Sklar, and Oliver Stone. He helped co-write.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Oliver Stone, of course, directed it and produced it. And then Arnon Milchan, the Jewish Israeli weapons trafficker spy, produced it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and it did a couple things, but one of the things it did is it presented. Oh, and then of course we have to mention the fourth guy that was really principally involved was a guy named Frank Mankiewicz. Okay. Frank Mankiewicz had been the press secretary for Bobby Kennedy. And he was the man who was responsible for sending Bobby Kennedy into the pantry at the Ambassador Hotel in 1968, where Saran was waiting for him to be shot, right? In another lone gunman setup. Okay. So Frank Mankiewicz, who was the press secretary for Bobby Kennedy in 1968, was actually a member of the ADL of the B'nai B'rith. Okay. Jewish. All right. He goes on to run NPR, National Public Radio, and he gets into the film business, the PR business, and he did PR for the movie JFK. And he wrote this famous essay where he questioned, he's like, it's all right to question the narrative, the Lee Harvey Oswald lone gunman narrative. And we should give this movie by Oliver Stone a chance. And the narrative presented by all these Jews in the movie JFK was that the CIA did it. And they basically mentioned the mob, they mentioned Vietnam, they mentioned the CIA, they mentioned all this stuff. The only thing they didn't mention was Israel and Jewish power networks, okay? And if you've done the research on the JFK assassination, you know that it's Jews everywhere, okay? They're all over that. The Jewish gangsters that were involved, the Dallas Citizens Council, that they were all Jews that invited them there. Abraham Zapruder was Jewish. The Daltex building where some of the shots came from, owned by Jews, and Zapruder had his own business in the Daltex building. And then, of course, the man who conceived the Warren Commission was named Eugene Rostow, who was a law professor at Yale. He reached out to the Lyndon Johnson administration after JFK was assassinated and said, hey, I think we ought to have this high-level commission and where we investigate this. It was his idea. Okay, so Eugene Rostow, a Russian Jew immigrant, or the child of Russian Jewish immigrants, he has this idea for a Warren Commission. And it was his idea to put Alan Dulles on the Warren Commission and Earl Warren, who led the Warren Commission. Now, Earl Warren, his campaign manager when he had been a senator in California was Jewish. So Earl Warren, he had Jewish handlers. And he had been Eugene Rostow's student at Yale University. Okay, so this Jew Eugene Rostow, so this Jew Eugene Rostow, not even a part of the government, head of Yale Law School, suggests the Warren Commission, and he places Earl Warren at the top and Alan Dulles onto the Warren Commission. Now, Alan Dulles had been the former head of the CIA, and we now know that Alan Dulles had been blackmailed by the Mossad since the 1940s. He was under blackmail from the Mossad since the 1940s. Okay, so now you have a Jew suggesting the Warren Commission, getting his guys placed on the Warren Commission, which include people who are being blackmailed by Jews. Okay, that's who's running the Warren Commission. Okay, and there's other stuff involved, but just briefly, the point I'm trying to make is Jews were behind the assassination of JFK. They masterminded it. They were essential to it getting carried out. They were essential to the planning. They were essential to the execution of the plan and the execution of JFK. And what they did is the Warren Commission, again, guided by people like Eugene Rostow, concluded it was lone gunman Lee Harvey Oswald. And then you had other Jews like Mark Lane coming in later and Oliver Stone coming in and saying, it wasn't the lone gunman, it was the CIA, And so you have this false paradigm, this false dialectic, this kosher sandwich where either side that you pick is wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's wrong, right? So that's one example. Now, let's fast forward, okay, to Israel and the crimes that Israel's perpetrating now against the Palestinians. And that's narrow focus. If we do a larger focus, there's obviously a fifth column occupation happening in America, okay, where our politicians seem to work for Israel, right? And there seems to be this thing going on in the Middle East, this Greater Israel Project. It's not just about Israeli crimes against Palestine. There's something larger going on. And we have these Zionist Jews, right? And then we have what's called anti-Zionist Jews. Organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine, If Not Now, In Our Lifetime. These are the four of the principal Jewish anti-Zionist groups. There's only like 6 principal anti-Zionist groups. And 4 of them are led and funded by Jews, okay? If Not Now, In Our Lifetime, Jewish Voices for Peace, and Students for Justice in Palestine. These are all either led by or founded by and or funded by and or founded by Jews, okay? People like George Soros, and alleged anti-Zionist Jew. He's poured in $20 to $25 million into backing these anti-Zionist Jewish groups just since 2017. Organization. Also, you have like Torah Jews, this account that's active on Twitter, who will say things like Zionism isn't Judaism, and Israel's not a Jewish state, and If Not Now, and Jewish Forces for Peace will call it white supremacy. Israel's a project of European colonialism and white supremacy, and these types of things, right? So so what they'll do is they try to get everybody in the world to pick one side or the other, to pick the Zionist Jew side. If you're on that side, you're like with Benjamin Netanyahu or Ben Shapiro or Laura Loomer or, any other average Zionist Jew, any other Jew that's like aligned, that's pro-Israel, Zionist. And this is somewhere between 85 to 95% of world Jewry is pro-Israel to some degree, okay? Pro-Zionist to some degree. Very, very, very small portion of worldwide Jews are legitimately against Israel. Somewhere between 1% and 5%. Maybe, I think it's, some closer to that 1%.
Yeah, it depends how you frame the question. To be honest, I've seen those polls, and it's very misleading. And frankly, like I tell people all the time, stop trying to look for the exception. Look at the overwhelming trend of organization.
You have to look at Jewish power and Zionism as a system, sort of like LA traffic. LA traffic, if you've ever been, where do you live? I don't want you to dox yourself, but can you tell me the state or the city you live in?
North Carolina. Yeah.
Okay.
Right now.
So let's say, let's say Charlotte, North Carolina probably has bad traffic in places, in the greater metropolitan Charlotte area, during, rush hour, probably has bad traffic. So you know what I'm talking about. But LA traffic's famous, right? If just that whole network of freeways, everything's a parking lot for half the day. We've all seen videos and pictures of just endless, headlights going off in the distance and traffic jams. LA traffic is a problem. It's a systemic problem. It's the entire system has problems. There's not enough roads. There's too many cars. There's traffic jams all over the place. It's an entire system. And it doesn't matter if there's a car parked in somebody's garage, okay, that's not on the road today, or that's using the side streets. It doesn't matter what kind of rubber is on the tires of the cars, Any one car, handful of cars doesn't matter because the entire system is a problem. Are you following me? The entire system is a problem. And it's the same thing with organized Jewish supremacy. It's a system. It's an interlocking network of organizations and money and power and individuals and millionaires and billionaires, synagogues, all kinds of stuff. And it's a philosophy too. It's in the Talmud. It's the way they think that the goyim or the Gentiles we're not ensouled beings. We're animals in human form. We don't have a soul like Jews do. Or they teach this stuff. They think this stuff. So there's also a thought process behind it. Now, maybe not every Jew thinks this, but the majority of them do, and it forms this network of Jewish supremacy, just like the Los Angeles traffic system. Okay, and no one Jew or small handful of Jews affects the dynamics of the system. The system exists regardless of what this individual Jew here thinks or that Jew over there thinks, right? So the system is the problem, and together they form the system. Like a forest. Another example would be a forest. You have a whole forest full of trees and plant life and animals and all this stuff. And it doesn't matter if there's like one rotten tree or one good tree in the forest. It's the whole forest. It's an entire ecosystem, and just any one plant or tree or animal, it doesn't affect the system at all, right? So one thing they like to do is say, get us caught up in is there good Jews or not all Jews are bad? They want us to focus on individuals rather than the system as a whole.
Yeah.
If they can keep us focused on, debating, is this Jew a good Jew or is that Jew bad or what is it? Which Jews are good? Which Jews are bad? Then what we're not talking about is the system of organized Jewish supremacy that empowers them, right? And that's where we have to have our focus now. So what they do is they've created this two-sided dichotomy, this kosher sandwich, where on the one side you have Zionist Jews who will blame, the problems on Muslims and brown people and third worlders and communists and leftists and Democrats.
White women.
Everybody in that bucket, right? This is the problem. You'll see people like Laura Loomer, Stephen Miller,
oh Lord,
these hardcore, Jewish Zionists. They'll align with white people, they'll align with conservatives and white people and Christians, right? And
it's a populace.
Yeah, and they'll say the Zionist Jews will align with those people, the white people, the Christians, right? The conservatives, the Republicans. They'll align with those people and say it's these damn Muslims, it's these brown people, it's these third worlders, it's the communists, right? That's what they'll say. Now, by the same token, the anti-Zionist Jews will align direct opposition to that. They'll align with the people that the Zionists say are the enemy. They'll align with the communists, with the Muslims, with the terrorists, the brown people, the third worlders, the leftists, the
golems.
That's who the anti-Zionist Jews will align with. And they'll blame the problems on white supremacy, Christian Zionists, conservatives and Republicans. That Republicans have sold out to AIPAC in Israel, right? And so what you have is this sandwich where on one side, you have one set of Jews that's attacking the Zionist Jews that attack communists and leftists and Democrats and communists and whatnot in Islam, and allying with white conservative Christians and Republicans. And then you'll have anti-Zionist Jews allying with the people, the opposite, and blaming the white conservative Christian Republicans. And so you have these two sides that attack each other's allies. So these two sides of Jews have allies, right? Zionist Jews and anti-Zionist Jews each have allies, and they're attacking each other's allies. You see what I'm saying? The enemy.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I know it's confusing. I wish I had the picture. I wish we could pull up the picture, because it's just this crisscross pattern where each side of Jews have allies, and the other group of Jews blames the allies. Right. But neither side blames Jews or Judaism or Jewish supremacy. So the Zionist Jews will blame Muslims, brown people, communists, leftists, and Democrats. And the anti-Zionist Jews will blame white people, Christians, Republicans, and conservatives. Okay. Now you'll notice that neither side blames Jews, Judaism, or Jewish supremacy. They're blaming Islam or they're blaming Christianity, but they're not blaming Judaism. They're blaming brown people and Democrats and communists, or white people, Christians, and conservatives, but nobody's blaming, and white supremacy, Nazis and white supremacy, but nobody's blaming Jewish supremacy. You see?
Yep.
And so they don't care which side you take, right? Now, the majority of Jews, of course, are Zionist Jews, and a very small minority are these anti-Zionist Jews, but neither side blames Jews, Judaism, or Jewish supremacy. So it doesn't matter what side you end up picking. If you're a Gentile, you won't be blaming Jews, Judaism, or Jewish supremacy for their infiltration of institutions, for what Israel is doing, the Jewish country, the Jewish colony, the major Jewish colony of Israel. You're not going to be blaming Jews, Judaism, or Jewish power. Okay. And that's where the locus of power ultimately is. So remember, we talked about the car. You can attack the seat belts and the seats and the side mirrors and the radio, right? And it looks like you're doing major damage to this car, but you haven't attacked the engine, you haven't attacked the wheelbase or the steering column, right? That's the system of Jewish supremacy. You're attacking all these satellite things that aren't actually the main problem. They're not the locus of power. The radio's not the locus of power. The seats aren't your locus of power. The side mirrors aren't your locus of power. The sunroof's not the locus of power. Heck, you could have a convertible. You don't even need the roof, right? And so it's the same thing here. If you're aligned with Zionists, you're attacking Muslims and brown people and communists. If you're anti-Zionist, you're attacking white people and Nazis and white supremacy and Christians and conservatives. Well, those aren't the locus of power for organized Jewish supremacy. Right? Those aren't the locus of power for Israel's operations. It's Jews and Jewish supremacy. Okay. So this is the kosher sandwich they've created, where you're blaming one set of people in the world or another set of people in the world, but neither side blames Jews, Judaism, or Jewish supremacy. And therefore, the system of organized Jewish supremacy remains untouched. And that locus of power survives intact. You've taken out the radio. Hey, great job. Guess what? The car's still going 60 miles an hour. Just fine. Okay. Same thing here. You've attacked white people. You've attacked Christianity. You've attacked Islam. You've attacked communism. You've attacked Democrats. You've attacked Republicans. But organized Jewish supremacy, completely intact. And they've gone even one better. Both sides use the shield of the Holocaust. Both sides use the shield of Jewish victimhood, world's greatest victims. Both sides benefit from all the laws against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-BDS laws. There's all these laws that say you can't treat Jews as a monolith or a collective. So even if you're an anti-Zionist Jew, they still benefit from all these laws being passed. It's not just Zionist Jews. All Jews benefit from them. And further, the anti-Zionist Jews will say, well, it's just the Zionists, not Jews. But no Zionist Christians, no Zionist Muslims are benefiting from any of these laws. In fact, we see Muslims getting deported from America who take an anti-Israel stance, right? They're taking an anti-Zionist, anti-Israel stance, but they don't get the protection of these anti-Jewish victimhood laws, but the anti-Zionist Jews do. See, so these laws protect Jewish supremacy as a whole, but they don't protect white people. They don't protect Christians. They don't protect Christian Zionists. They don't protect Republican white conservatives. They don't protect leftist Muslims and brown Democrats that aren't Jewish. If you're not a Jew, you're not protected by these laws. These laws only protect Jews, whether they be Zionist or anti-Zionist Jews.
One thing, one really brief foray I had when I was really involved in the anti-war scene was the pro-Palestinian scene. And those organizations, as you mentioned, are disproportionately Jewish in terms of the membership, the leaders, the pundits that supposedly represent the pro-Palestinian side, and even the funding. I've talked to some Palestinians that have actually gotten black-pilled in those activist circles because they always told me the same thing, that in these discourses, that the only acceptable, not only opinions, obviously being the Jewish supremacist Zionist opinions, but the only acceptable actors that could be on the stage were generally Jews and occasionally a Palestinian, but it was a Palestinian that either was taking Jewish money or has had their brain infected by Jewish supremacist memes and all of that. And they've told me this, and that's one thing that really clicked, because I noticed this, that these debates were just fake debates ultimately, that only just further crystallize this Jewish supremacist dynamic in all of the political system. And that's one of the reasons I've warned a ton of people, if you see an anti-Zionist Jew that puts out good critiques of Israel, do not treat them like a political ally, because they're not. They're at best they're running cover for the excesses of Jewish supremacy, but they are still reifying the premises of that system.
Right. That's exactly right. Remember, Their highest loyalty is to the Jewish people and to the organized Jewish world Jewry, right? Organized Jewish supremacy. This is what they're loyal to first and foremost. Now, for most Jews, it is an express part of that transnational network, right? They have colonies in New York, Florida. Like I call them colonies. There's like high amounts of Jews in LA, New York, Florida, right? Paris, London. If you're familiar with airline hub and spoke model, the hub and spoke travel model of airlines, where cities around the country, around the world, where airlines are based out of, and they have this little spoke, like a wheel hub spoke model. That's sort of how worldwide Jewry is, and it's like the principal hub of worldwide Jewry. And then they have all these spokes and other smaller hubs, right? But in transnational identity, remember, world Jewry pre-exists the state of Israel.
Yes.
World Jewry managed to accomplish the creation of the state of Israel because world Jewry existed first, okay? Israel didn't exist first. Worldwide Jewry, organized Jewish supremacy, existed first. And it used its power and influence to create the state of Israel. Okay. And they used the state of Israel to aid their operations and provide a safe home base, a sovereign base that has a nuclear program, a military, and it can protect Jewish interests all around the world. But remember, organized Jewry pre-exists the state of Israel. And they had to use terrorism and the mob and other dark influencing tactics and dark arts, as I call them, to blackmail people, to murder people, ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, to get their nation set up.
Yeah.
Right? So the other thing we have to remember is that we have to talk about controlled opposition. Okay, and people need to understand that there is opposition to Israel, and Israel knows there's opposition to Israel. All right, so therefore, as Lenin said, the best way to defeat the opposition is to control it ourselves. If you can control the opposition to you and your movement, you can make sure that opposition never amounts to anything. And it's a pressure release valve for the people who actually oppose you, right? So if you can control the opposition, I'll give you a real world example. I saw this movie about Elvis a couple years ago. And there was a lot of people that didn't like Elvis back in the day. So what his management team did is they actually sold the anti-Elvis buttons and T-shirts and stuff. They sold the Elvis fan stuff, and they also sold the anti-Elvis stuff, right? And so they basically controlled the market on both sides, and they made money whether you liked Elvis or not. You made money. They made money, right? Elvis made money, and these countries and intelligence agencies do the same thing. Where Israel's like, our existence is threatened by people who oppose us. Therefore, you must understand that they are therefore going to try and hijack control of the opposition against them. So that this is a way to make sure that opposition against you is neutralized, right? So there can't be any effective opposition against you. So, of course, the Mossad and Israeli intelligence and the nation of Israel are going to, in some way, try to control or insert themselves into the opposition against them. Okay, that's just simple logic. You don't have to, you don't need advanced calculus to understand that, of course, Israel and Jews are going to try and get involved in the movements that oppose them. Okay, that's what they're going to do. Well, where should we look to find that? Well, wouldn't Jewish organizations who oppose Israel, isn't that like the most logical spot to look for this controlled opposition? And when you do that, like I said, there's 6 major anti-Zionist, organizations around the world, these pro-Palestinian organizations, and 4 of them are explicitly founded and or funded and or led by Jews. If not now, in our lifetime, Jewish Voices for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. These are the 4 of the 6 major organizations. I haven't done a deep dive on the other 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if the other 2 have Jewish connections behind them.
Yeah, there's probably something. Yeah.
And as I said earlier, George Soros has spent $20 to $25 million just since 2017 funding things like Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voices for Peace. They're part of his funding network. the Open Society foundations. He gives money to the Tides Foundation, which then gives money to these organizations. You have like a millionaire or billionaire, I think his name's Howard Horowitz. He funds, if not now or in our lifetime, one of those two. So you have big Jewish money and organizational genius behind these organizations. And they're putting out this messaging that Israel is white supremacy and that Israel is not a Jewish state and Zionism isn't Judaism. It's all these deflections away from Jews, Judaism, and organized Jewish power, right? Now, here's the question I want people to consider. Have you ever known George Soros to spend tens of millions of dollars on a cause and not get something in return? Now, he spent tens of millions of dollars on the anti-Zionist cause. But let's look at the tail of the tape. What has the anti-Zionist cause, what has the Jewish-led anti-Zionist cause accomplished? Have they accomplished a one or a two-state solution? No. Have they stopped the ethnic cleansing or genocide of Palestinians? No. Have they gotten any of these anti-Zionism laws, repealed anywhere? No. What have they accomplished? Nothing. In terms of for Palestinians, they have literally accomplished nothing. And on the other side, there's been a lot of laws passed that punish you for supporting Palestine and punish you for speaking out against Israel if you're a Gentile, right? That's what they have accomplished. So isn't it kind of weird that George Soros, he keeps spending tens of millions of dollars on this, cannot get anything out of it? What's he getting out of it? What are all of these Jewish organizations getting out of it? I'll tell you what they're getting out of it. They're getting you to blame anybody else but Jews, right? And most of the people in the pro-Palestinian movement, the worldwide solidarity movement, the anti-Zionist movement that dominates the world, all this messaging, they say, don't blame Jews, blame Zionists. There's more Christian Zionists than Jewish Zionists.
Yeah, white people.
And white people and European colonialism and settler colonialism, and Israel's an outpost of Western imperialism. So the locus of power, they got the locus of power wrong. So you got the leaders of Iran or Iraq or other leaders or Syria, other Arab leaders who oppose Israel. And they'll say Israel's a vassal state of the United States, or it's an outpost of Western imperialism, that they love
Chomsky, yeah.
Or they love Jews or whatever. And Judaism, and their problem isn't with Jews and Judaism. And they don't acknowledge Jewish supremacy. They don't acknowledge that it's actually the other way around. The United States is Israel's bitch, and look at Zohar Mamdani, this leftist Islamic candidate for mayor in New York City. He's being backed by Jewish billionaires. All right, Jim Simons, who was a big-time Wall Street investor, billionaire, who recently passed away, his daughter is funding Zohar Mamdani. Right, and he's also got major backing and funding from other Jewish organizations. So again, it's this. You have some Jews and Jewish organizations aligning with a Muslim communist, a brown guy, a third worlder, right? And then so this is just typical kosher sandwich, right? And I can tell you, if you come across an anti-Zionist Jew, I can guarantee you that they're going to be anti-white. Okay, they're going to be for open borders.
Oh yeah.
Immigration,
100%.
And they're going to promote Islam and brown people and Democrats and leftist politics. That's what they're going to do. And they're very anti-white. And if you find a Zionist Jew, you'll probably find somebody that'll talk a lot about Judeo-Christian values and conservatism. And Israel's the outpost of Western civilization. We got to protect it. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It's our ally, right? That's what they'll say, right? So that's what George Soros' entire left-wing Jewish apparatus is getting, is they're getting you to blame anybody but Jews and organized Jewish supremacy. Mm-hmm. That's what they're getting for their money, okay? They're not getting anything for Palestine because that's not the point. The point is to facilitate Israel and worldwide Jewry accomplishing its machinations, right? Accomplishing greater Israel, occupying the nations around the world, increasing the power and the wealth and the prestige and the reach of the worldwide Jewish transnational state. Okay, that's what's going on, and George Soros is part of that. He's got his Open Society Foundation that's operating all around the world, promoting multiculturalism and open borders and these multiracial societies that allow Jews to thrive. And also he's a boogeyman. You'll see a lot of these Gentiles that are aligned with Zionists on the right, like an account like Data Republican. obviously allied with, Zionist Jews, and she will do these threads exposing George Soros and the Muslim Brotherhood. So she, uh, but you talk to her about broad Jewish power, and these people will say, well, George Soros doesn't represent worldwide Jewry. He's just a guy. He's just an individual, right?
Yeah.
Individual. But there's a lot of
individual oligarch.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, but George Soros isn't canceled. So the point is this is being done with intelligence at some level. There's intelligence agency coordination going on. The Mossad is likely coordinating this operation through a network of NGOs and activists and other organizations like the ADL and the SPLC, and these funding apparatuses. They're sort of coordinating this overall ecosystem of messaging on the anti-Zionist right. And it's working because, a relatively very small percentage of worldwide Jewry, and worldwide Jewry is already a small number of people. So, if we were to believe them, it's only like 16 million Jews, right? And so the number of anti-Zionist Jews, it's like 1 to 5% of that. So it's a very, very small portion of worldwide Jewry is putting out this message, but it's enough to convince like billions of Muslims and Arabs and brown people and, and leftists and anti-Zionist Gentiles around the world. It's enough to convince them that we shouldn't blame organized Jewish supremacy. We should blame white people and Christians and Zionists, and right. So they're getting a big ROI for their investment. So George Soros,
100%, yeah,
$20 million supporting these anti-Jewish causes or these anti-Zionist causes, and he's convincing billions of people around the world to not blame organized Jewish supremacy, of which he's a part. You see, that's what he's buying for his money, and he's getting you cheap, people. He's getting the goyim cheap. They laugh at us. They think we're stupid.
Yeah,
this is absolutely an intelligence operation. It's being, that isn't to say that every Jew in these organizations is an intelligence operator or controlled. They're not, right? The point is it's done at the top by the main power brokers behind the scenes, pulling the strings. That's who's organizing this. And then this allows a pressure release valve for rank and file Jews who are honest or conscientious objectors to this. They're able to now do that. They're able to object to what Israel's doing, while still retaining their Jewish identity, while still having full fellowship and brotherhood with worldwide Jewry, right? They're not alienated from worldwide Jewry, who's mostly Zionist, right? And so this narrative doesn't just deflect blame away from Jews and Judaism and organized Jewish supremacy and fool the Gentiles into going the wrong direction and attacking the wrong locus of power. It also helps Jews preserve their identity, their group solidarity, and their group identity. It keeps organized Jewish supremacy and world Jewry from fracturing. So they can have political disagreements, but they still retain their Jewish solidarity and their Jewish identity and their Jewish victimhood. You see what I'm saying? So it helps.
Yes. This
messaging and these outlets also help worldwide Jewry maintain its solidarity and cohesion as well. And lastly, it balkanizes the resistance to Israel and worldwide Jewry by having one half of the world being anti-racist, anti-Zionists, and another faction being racial anti-Semites. So we'd say like the dissident right, who say, no, the problem is Jewish power and race realism is real. And then you have this anti-Zionist, anti-racist left, these people who are anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, but they'll still talk about white supremacy, and they'll be against white people, and they'll be for multiculturalism and diversity and these types of things, right? And so it balkanizes the opposition to Israel, because now you have two sides, one that's anti-white and one that's pro-white, and they're fighting each other. They're both opposed Israel, but they fight against each other on the basis of race and anti-Semitism and these things. So it balkanizes the resistance to Israel and organized Jewish supremacy. So you see how like how many benefits accrue to organized Jewish supremacy. It balkanizes the opposition, so Gentiles can't produce enough resistance to defeat organized Jewish.
Breaks solidarity.
Yeah. It breaks solidarity amongst the Gentiles. It increases the solidarity amongst Jews. Right. And it moves the locus of power away from Jewish supremacy, so that any resistance that does happen to arise attacks the wrong locus of power and therefore doesn't accomplish anything. Just like attacking the radio in your car doesn't stop your car. I want to say that this isn't accidental. Sorry, I keep interrupting. Yeah. But this isn't accidental. It's all these benefits. They're all operating in concert and in synergy
by design.
With Israel and worldwide Jewry. And if you think that's an accident, I got some kosher bagels to sell you.
Yeah, there's no coincidence in politics. Having been in this game for well over a decade, there are no coincidences. Funny you mentioned dissident right, because I've been writing about this lately, that these dynamics are also manifesting themselves as like the current political order is breaking down with like the emergence of all these so-called populist parties, the United States and also Europe, with the National Conservative Network headed by Yoram Hazony and other Jews like David Brog. These groups
And
are
Hazony is a great example of a Zionist Jew who will ally with white people and Christians.
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Against the leftists and the communists.
Yeah.
The third worldists, right?
Yes, and these guys are very insidious because they'll sound like quasi-identitarian, and they'll even counter signal against neoconservatives, but these are just rhetorical flourishes. It's nothing of substance. When you actually look at what they're doing, they're just crowding out any type of Gentile response to the excesses of like the prevailing Jewish supremacist order. And one thing too, I've seen I'd seen way too many people in like the dissident right spaces and even some white nationalist spaces, unfortunately, kind of fall into these traps, thinking that, oh, if we make this Faustian bargain with these peoples, we might get some deportations. It's like, nope, you're not getting that. And here's the kicker: these so-called populist right Jews, they're already forging alliances with Hindu nationalists in India, and look what's going to be coming to the U.S. soon.
Yeah.
You're going to get the legal immigration bait and switch, where you're going to get infinity pajeets, and you're not going to get mass deportations, or maybe like performative deportations.
The notable deportations we're getting is people who oppose Israel.
Oh, yes.
Like, in fact, I saw something funny the other day. Somebody super chatted Nick Fuentes and said, hey, how can we convince, 50 million Mexicans to make pro-Hamas tweets? Right? Like if somehow we could make 50 million Mexicans, pro-Hamas, maybe they'll get deported. But of course, that's not how it works. They wouldn't, because, and that's, with the Indian thing is actually very interesting, because, they'll blame Christian Zionists and they'll say, well, there's more Christian Zionists than Jewish Zionists. So it's not really a Jewish thing. It's a Zionism thing. But of course, Christian Zionists wouldn't exist without Jewish Zionists, right? Really.
Yeah.
And it's not Christians running, Christian can't go to Israel and get elected to government. It's not Christians flying the planes and dropping the bombs and picking the targets and starving the Gazans. It's not, the Christians aren't doing any of that. And Christians don't get any of the benefit. They can't make aliyah. They can't become citizens. I think they can't even get married, in Israel, except in certain cases. And, and Christians aren't protected by any of these anti-Zionist laws, or anti-BDS laws. So that's just a canard. But the bigger point I want to make is there's like 1.5 billion Indians, and they're mostly Zionists. So there's way more Zionist Indians than Christian Zionists. How come we're not blaming the Indians? How come we're only blaming the Christians and white people? Well, because Jews are anti-Christian and they're anti-white. And so even the anti-Zionist Jews are anti-white and anti-Christian, right? So so now what we have is a situation where, okay, they brought too many Muslims into the Western world where Jews live, right? And Muslims are by and large anti-Israel, and that's bad for Jews. They don't like that. They're uncomfortable by that. They don't feel safe. So we still want to destroy white people in Christendom. Can't use Muslims to do that anymore. It's problematic because Muslims are against Israel. So let's just replace the Muslims with Indians.
Yeah, and Africans.
And Africans, right? Let's replace them with Indians who are actually more antagonistic of white people, more antagonistic to Christianity, and pro-Israel, right? So now we get all the benefits of multiculturalizing the West, even more so because Indians are even more anti-Christian. Did I say Muslims? I meant Indians. Indians are extremely anti-Christian, and they're very anti-white, much more so than Muslims and Arabs on either of those two counts. Yeah. And the big difference is Indians are pro-Israel, whereas Muslims and Arabs aren't, right? So So they still get to destroy the West, destroy the culture of the West and the racial foundations of the West, the nationalist foundations of the West, but swapping out the anti-Israel faction for the pro-Israel faction. That's what's happening. Basically. This is why you get Tommy Robinsons of the world saying, hey, you know, we like the Indians, bring in the Indians, bring them in. Let's just get rid of the Muslims, right? So that's what's going on there. And, you know, and of course, that aligns with Silicon Valley and big business who wants to bring in cheap labor, who already speaks English, who's got some sort of, you know, tech skills, if you will.
So
there's a lot of interests aligning. You have organized Jewish supremacy that has an interest in multiculturalizing the nations in which it exists to protect Jews. Jews always feel more comfortable, and they talk about this openly. They feel more comfortable being in these multicultural societies that are heterogeneous, and they can't provide any sort of homogenized opposition to Jewish power, right? They can sort of be chameleons and, you know, and it creates all these balkanized factions. Nobody can gain enough unanimity, if you will, or organizational power to oppose Jewish supremacy. So they're pushing this multiculturalism. You know, they're also very anti-white, going back to the days of the Roman Empire. They're very anti-Christian, going back to, you know, millennia of dealing with the Catholic Church. So they're very anti-Christian, very anti-white, whether you're Zionist or anti-Zionist, right? And so they're just more comfortable in these multicultural societies. They're more comfortable amongst Hindus than they are with Muslims. And that's what's going on. So, you know, and so, of course, that interest is aligned with the big tech companies who want the cheap labor. And a lot of big tech is run by Jews and Jewish power. Look at, you know, Google and Pinterest even, and Facebook and Instagram and many other of these Silicon Valley tech companies and venture capital funds. They're run by Jews or have heavy Jewish influence. So they want to make money. So they want the cheap labor, and they get the synergy of getting the cheap labor plus multiculturalizing the West and retaining, you know, their Jewish victimhood status. And they're creating an environment where Jewish supremacy can operate unimpeded. Right. So a lot of things, a lot of interests are aligned there and going on with that.
Yeah, I had one piece of mine that was reshared on the UN's review where I looked at the world opinion of like Israel after October 7th, and there were only 3 countries where there was like actually like a favorable opinion of Israel since its ethnic cleansing campaign. They were obviously India, Nigeria, and Kenya. And Nigeria is a really rated legal immigration destination place where a lot of legal migrants are swamping areas. Because I grew up in Texas, and there's tons of those, and they're just going to crank that up even more because those countries have really Zionized Christian golem populations that Israelis tap into all the time, and they're facing Islamic insurgencies as well, and same thing with Indians too. So they're like Jewish supremacist interests love these Tower of Babel polities that have these constant conflicts because it's the perfect divide rule.
Yeah, if we can keep white people and black people fighting, Christians and Muslims fighting, nobody's fighting the Jews. Because everybody agrees that Jews are victims.
Yeah, exactly.
Little minority victims, we have to protect them. It's the Christians and the white people. No, it's the blacks and the Muslims, you know? And they stoke that, right? They stoke that.
I want to go back to this one point just before we depart, because it did click when you talked about JFK and Mark Lane. That name is reminded me of a lot of discussions when I used to work at this conspiracy bookstore in Austin, Texas. And that every JFK conspiracy theorist would always talk about him and other approved people. And I tell them and I would catch up with these people years after the fact and tell them straight up that the JFK conspiracies in of themselves are not system disapproved. They're actually oftentimes system approved because of the fact that the narrative of who the actors are, how it's portrayed, because a lot of this is a kosher narrative.
They don't care who you blame. They don't care
Yeah.
who you blame as long as you're not blaming Jews.
Yeah.
Organized Jewish
Yep.
supremacy. As long as that's not part of the conversation, they don't care. So they're
Yeah.
they're throwing all sorts of stuff at the wall to captivate your attention. Oh, it's the mob, it's the Cubans, it's the British monarchy, it's Jackie, it's the guy that was in the street. You know, it's CIA, it's the FBI, it's the transnational corporations, the military industrial complex, you know. Or it was Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone shooter, right? So they don't care. They just bombard the space with all of these different conspiracies.
Flood the zone, yeah.
Flood the zone. And as long as you're... Now, some people might notice and put the pieces together, like they'll realize that, Israel wanted nukes and JFK was trying to stop them from getting nukes. They'll know about, JFK and RFK's efforts to try to get the Israeli lobby to register as foreign agents under FARA. They might even know about how JFK was actively pushing and promoting UN resolution 140, 141 or 144, which was the Palestinian right of return, right? So he had his diplomats at the UN the week that he was assassinated, promoting the resolution, the UN resolution for right of return of Palestinians. He was also, people might know about all this stuff. And they might see all the Jewish connections, but then there's a bunch of other factions of people who see all these other connections. And so there's a balkanization, right? The Jews love balkanization. We see it playing out in the Middle East, right? Where you have all these different factions in Syria fighting each other. Then you have the different Gulf states and Arab states fighting with each other. They can't get on the same page. And so Israel, and as they're disunified, Israel's just picking them off one at a time, picking off Lebanon, picking off Syria, and now they're going after Iran, right? So they keep it all balkanized and fighting with each other. Same thing in the JFK space here, right? They just have all these different factions, and there's no broad-based consensus and agreement. What's really interesting, though, I find, is that Americans, if you tell them the CIA did it, Americans won't have any problem with that. If you tell Americans it was the mob, they won't have any problem with that. But if you say it was the Jews, whoa, bro. Yeah. Or if you say it was the Mossad, they'll be like, what do you mean? You got to prove it. Where's the receipts? Where's the smoking gun? But why don't Americans demand a smoking gun for the CIA or a smoking gun?
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't care because of decades of indoctrination by the media, by the just Jewish controlled media paradigm, right? They don't care if you can, just like with these anti-BDS laws, you can boycott the United States, right? No problem. But if you boycott Israel, now you can't get a loan, you can't get contracts, you can't get
fuck with the sovereign.
You can't get disaster relief aid. And recently I saw that if you burn an Israeli flag, that's a hate crime against Jews. Now that's going to become against the law, but you can still burn an American flag. So, this is the indoctrination. This is how they work. This is how they operate. It's organized Jewish supremacy that accomplishes a network of Jewish donors and Jewish power networks and Jewish organizations and synagogues and AIPAC and all of that. It all operates together in concert for the World Zionist Congress, the World Jewish Congress, Zionist Organization of America, the Jewish Organizations of North America. Like all these different interlocking Jewish organizations are working together to create this system of Jewish supremacy that occupies our government, that occupies our country. And our media and the Disney companies run by Jews, and Breitbart, PragerU, New York Post, and Fox News, run by the Rupert Murdoch, who's like good buddies with Benjamin Netanyahu and a donor to the Likud party, and is married to probably a Russian Jewish spy, a likely honey trap. Her name's Elena Zykova, whose daughter was married to Roman Abramovich, one of the Jewish oligarchs of Russia, right? And he's Russian Israeli. So Rupert Murdoch is now probably married to some sort of Jewish honey trap of some kind. But this is who forms the conservative ecosystem. Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, who's aligned with Israel. I recently learned that Rush Limbaugh went to Israel and kissed the wall back in 1991. I believe it was. So for the majority of Rush Limbaugh's career, he was a Zionist, and he kissed the wall, took the trip to Israel, and most Jews would credit him with basically indoctrinating the entire conservative movement to supporting Israel, maybe more than any other person alive or dead, Rush Limbaugh ingratiated the conservative movement and Republicans to supporting Israel. And I listened to him for 25 years, 20 or 25 years, and I never heard him talk about Jewish power or Israeli occupation of America. He only ever spoke well of it, spoke fondly of it, and and even on his deathbed, he still didn't name him, right? So, there's just this long tradition of protecting Jews and Jewish power. William F. Buckley, Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson, so. Yeah, we could go on and on about this, but the point is Americans, they've been systematically, what's the word I'm looking for? Indoctrinated, conditioned, maybe, to view Israel as our allies, to view Jews as these powerless victims and minorities. But the truth is that organized Jewish supremacy is, backed by the transnational Jewish nation that's occupying our countries, that's empowering the state of Israel. And if we can't identify that locus of power, then we can't, and we're going to continue to keep making the same mistakes and keep going into these, spinning our wheels, going into these dead ends.
Fool's errand.
Yeah, fool's errand.
I'm just curious honestly, who or which theorists were able to kind of break through just all the noise about the JFK conspiracy theories and actually start pinpointing it on Israel and
it's for me it's two three guys. Michael Collins Piper was the first guy to put all the pieces together, right? Back in the 90s, his book Final Judgment. And I think it was really what helped him was the publication of The Samson Option by Seymour Hersh back in the early 1990s, where Israel's nuclear program is revealed. And the public for the first time becomes aware basically of the nuclear program and of the tension that existed between John F. Kennedy and David Ben-Gurion. And so once that came out and became known, then Michael Collins Piper was able to, that was like the missing piece that he needed, and he put it all together. And then and then another author I think has done great work on this. His name is Laurent Laurent Gouino. Yes, I always forget how to pronounce his name. I'm actually friends with him. I've had him in spaces. We talk in DMs sometimes and email back and forth at other times. So I've actually become friends with him. I read his book, I'm blanking on what it's called. I think it's called The Unspoken Kennedy Truth or something like that. But if you look him up, he wrote a book on this. Which distills and incorporates a lot of Michael Collins Piper information plus his own research. He also did a documentary that you can find on YouTube or Rumble or Twitter now. And I think those two guys, and then of course Ron Unz as part of his American Pravda series, he did like a 2 or 3 part. Exposing this. And that's where I first became aware of it. That's why I say 3 people, because I first became aware of it on the Unz review when Unz published Final Judgment. He got the copyright for it and published it on his website. You can go read it for free on Unz Review. You can also read it on archive.org. But he did a whole summary. He did a massive 2-part article summarizing Michael Collins Piper's findings. And then he also published a long article by Laurent. And then that led me to Laurent's book and Laurent's documentary. And so I read all that, watched all that, and really, and then you start doing your own research and you start finding things that aren't even in the books or in the articles. No matter where you look everywhere you look, when you start digging into the JFK assassination and the conspiracy around that, you'll find Jews. I mean, it's even goes so far, like Joe Rogan had a conversation about it with, a few months back. Who was he talking to? I don't remember.
Ian Carroll?
It might have been Ian Carroll. Yes, I think it was Ian Carroll. And Joe Rogan kept bringing up this guy or that guy, odds and ends, sort of odds and ends commentary, if you will. And every guy that he brought up was a Jew. Like every guy, and you just cannot talk about the JFK conspiracy. You can't lift up any rock or look behind any corner or peer behind any curtain without finding Jews. They're literally everywhere. Even Yitzhak Rabin. And I don't think this fact is in either Michael Collins Piper or Laurent's book, that Yitzhak Rabin was in Dallas the day that Kennedy was shot. And we now know that he cut his trip short that day and went back to Israel. And his wife, Leah Rabin, writes about it in her biography of him called, I think it's just called Rabin or something. She wrote a biography and she talks about how they were in Dallas that day. And she said, you know, and it's very odd the way that she relates it, because she almost says it in some sort of exculpatory, qualifying manner back in the 1990s. And I'm like, why would you have to qualify yourself back in the 1990s? This is before anybody really even knew about the Israel JFK connection. So I thought that was kind of interesting that she's like sort of making these conditional exception or qualifying why they, you know, that they didn't have anything to, of course, this was all coincidence, she says. I'm like, well, why would you need to say that when back at a time when nobody was suspecting Israel anyway? So I thought that was kind of weird. But then he was shortly after the JFK assassination, he was appointed the IDF chief of staff, which is basically the head of the Israeli armed forces. So it was shortly after the JFK assassination, when he was coincidentally in Dallas the day that JFK was shot, and mysteriously cut his trip short, his planned trip short, and went back to Israel. Then he gets promoted head of the IDF.
Yeah,
That's just a lot of coincidences, bro. You know.
Yeah, the level of loose ends that need to be tied in that whole JFK narrative. There's a lot of stuff, and especially as more information gets declassified and just like new research as well. Because I think that the community that you're like, the broader community that we're part of, we're still putting like the puzzle pieces together as we speak. It's like it's a good thing, because a lot of this stuff we're being fed fairy tale history that like completely keeps us away from the truth.
Right. But you'll still see it now. There's been so many people pushing and jumping on this wagon that, you know, Israel killed JFK, that now you're starting to see the gatekeepers even say stuff like, well, I think maybe it was the CIA, but maybe they had the help of the Mossad. I saw a lot of people this year say, well, you know, it was the CIA with some Mossad help, which doesn't make any sense. Why would the CIA, if it resolves to kill JFK, why would they reach out to the Mossad for help?
Yeah.
It doesn't even make any sense. You know, CIA doesn't need the Mossad's help to kill somebody. That's crazy. And, you know, you're seeing stuff like this now. Well, you know, maybe it was elements of the Mossad, or maybe some Jewish elements of organized crime. They helped the CIA, but the narrative remains fixed on it was the U.S. government and the CIA. That's where and you'll even see Tucker Carlson now talking about James Angleton, who was actually the member of the CIA who helped Israel carry out the assassination. But James Angleton, huge Zionist.
He's an Israeli asset.
It was an Israeli asset. He headed the Israel desk at the CIA. He was the head of CIA counterintelligence. He was the only person in the American intelligence community authorized to officially interact with the Israelis for over 20 years. All right, just him. And, you know, and he made dozens and dozens and dozens of trips to Israel over the years. And we now know from these declassified JFK documents this year that he also, it looks like he traded nuclear information to Israel in exchange for intelligence on the Soviet Union back, right? And, but that's still, you know, that came out recently that, you know, that whole theft of American nuclear material and American nuclear military technology that somehow ended up in Israel happened under his watch, probably with his help. And so that's your CIA involvement, by the way, is this guy who's the head of the Israel desk, who is an Israeli asset. It was the CIA. No. And maybe the Mossad helped. No, it was the exact opposite. It was a Jewish operation that enlisted elements of Israel, the Mossad, Jewish organized crime, and a few useful Gentiles, Shabbos Goyim, as we call them, like James Angleton.
Well, I think this is a good spot to wrap this up, Sam. But thank you for taking the time out of your evening for this conversation.
Absolutely.
Before we leave, let my audience know where they can follow your work.
Yeah, I'm mostly active on Twitter under Based Sam Parker. One word, Based Sam Parker. I have a secondary account called Sam Parker Senate that's left over from my Senate run that we spoke of earlier. I'm still active on there, so go follow both of those. And I'm also on Telegram. If you go to my Twitter page on my Sam Parker Senate profile, or my Base Sam Parker profile on Twitter, you can go to my Flow page, and it directs you to all my links if you want to donate to me, or become a subscriber to me, or follow me on Telegram or Gab or Rumble or Instagram or wherever. It's got all the links there. But I'm principally active on Twitter under Based Sam Parker and Sam Parker Senate.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on to the show, man. And to my audience, thank you again for tuning in. And with that, El Nino has spoken.